sharing our stories connects us. Listen and be connected. Join us for the Conversation meeting weekly at the intersection of community and culture. And that's that. We got a little truncated version of it, but that's okay.
That works.
It'll work for today. Welcome, everybody, to this, your Wednesday edition of The Conversation. My name is Mario Nunez, and as always, I'm looking at my broadcast partner. That's you, buddy.
Joe King Carter.
That's your cue. Get in there, Joe.
There it is.
Get in there, Joe.
Welcome, everybody.
And we're going to be doing this show each and every Wednesday until the cows come home, as they say. I don't even know what that means, Joe, but I guess people say that because it has a reference to a long time.
Yes, the cows can take a long time to come home.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to be doing that. Again, we're so grateful that you're listening this week. We're so grateful that you're always hard by our side. WMNF Community Radio does an excellent job of bringing people together. And I think that that's our mission statement here, right, Joe? Our tagline is, meeting each week at the intersection of community and culture.
Correct.
Do a little deep dive in it. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's a community radio station, and community is everything, right? And I think that for me personally, I believe that community is the construct and connection that we need in our society right now as a balm to sort of heal us. We need to be connected as human beings, and what our modern society does is it kind of works to alienate us a little bit. We get involved in social media. We are not connected in the community in the way that our grandfathers and grandmothers were. And I think that the connection is what's important to me, and that community connection is so very important, particularly in individuals sharing their stories.
And that, my friend, is a wonderful segue, because that's what we're going to be doing here at The Conversation. We're going to be talking to people that we know are vibrant in the community, people maybe that you've never heard their names before. We're certainly going to be talking to some of our contemporaries here at WMNF. I think today is a perfect example of that. We have Walter L. Smith, Jr. For those of you that listen to WMNF, and we know you all do, he works on Sunday mornings. He is the host of the Sunday Forum.
Absolutely.
And how long has he been doing that now, Joe?
I don't know how long. The Sunday Forum, first of all, has been on the air forever. And Walter has been holding up the masthead for what, 10 years?
Our guiding light.
Nearly 10 years.
10 years.
There's that voice.
Yes, there it is. There it is. So, let me just say that when we started talking about doing this show, The Conversation, which is in that space where Randy Zimmerman was doing Slice of Life.
Correct.
We wanted to still continue as a public affairs show to touch on topics, but to really talk about personal stories. And in talking about today and Juneteenth, and you and I kind of came up with the light bulb at the same time that this would be a perfect moment to bring Walter in. It's the idea of cross-fertilization that I like so much, because what's happening here is that people who are listening today at noon may not be up on Sunday morning. And I will tell you that I intentionally, unless it's been a really rough Saturday night, I intentionally get up every Saturday morning. And
Sunday morning,
every Sunday morning.
I make it feel like a Saturday, right?
Yeah, that's right. He makes it a party. And so I listen to Sunday Forum and then Postmodern Hootenanny, and man, my Sunday starts off in a beautiful way because of that. It's an excellent show. I'm going to do a promo for you right now. It's an excellent show about not only black issues and culture, but culture, affairs, issues across the board. I learned something at every show, and he and his crew with Mobili, they do an incredible job.
Mobili, Miss Ann. Got him.
Miss Ann,
yeah,
correct. I'm sorry. Sorry, Miss Ann.
And part and parcel why he's with us today on this inaugural show. I would be remiss at the top of the show, as we're going to be discussing with Walter a myriad of topics. We're going to drill down a little bit on Juneteenth, because today we are celebrating June 19th and its history. But we lost one of the icons of Major League Baseball history here just last night. And it was actually, he passed in the afternoon yesterday. Willie Mays, born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1931. And I knew this was coming because, as we all know, man, the story eventually will end, and nobody gets out of this alive. But Willie was the last one. You thought of Hammer and Hank, Roberto Clemente, we lost him way too soon. Mickey Mantle, we lost him too soon as well. And all those guys that came out of that era of professional baseball. But I think Willie's numbers almost stand alone. And if he hadn't lost 2 years to his military service, imagine he would have given Babe Ruth a run for his money.
Absolutely.
And probably would have been the gold standard. And then he and Henry Aaron had that wonderful back and forth for so many years. But for so many kids that are of a certain age, I think everybody looked to Willie and his fantastic
Of course.
joy, because he played with great joy. You know, he did. He absolutely brought it each and every night. I think they talked about him. You know, back in those early days in the 50s and 60s, the season consisted of 154 games. He played 154 games for how many years consecutively? He showed up to work. So, Willie, we appreciate you. We love you. Those of us that are baseball fans, today's kind of a day of reverence. And on Thursday, tomorrow, they're doing a special broadcast from Birmingham, Alabama, and the stadium in which Willie Mays broke into the Negro Leagues back then, because it was still segregated in the South.
Yes.
So anyway, that's my tribute to Willie Mays, and may he rest in peace, and may he always be remembered.
Excellent. Yes. An inspirational figure in many, many ways.
In many ways, not just in athletics,
Yeah.
certainly. So let's introduce our guest today, which we kind of already did. Walter L. Smith, Jr. Junior. All right, Junior. Well, how did you get to be a junior?
Actually, I'm the second.
Okay.
I'm the second. Man, my mom hears you say Junior, Lord have mercy, man.
Okay, we don't want to get Mom on our backs now. Come on now.
She always likes to tell me that I was born by design.
I like that. What exactly does that mean?
That means that I was supposed to be exactly like my dad. You know, my father was Dr. Walter L. Smith, former president of Florida A&M University, 7th president, lucky number 7, right? And he was an international educator, right? And my mother said to me that, I'll never forget her telling me that one day. I said, well, Mom, why is my name Walter? She says, well, son, you know, we have 7 Walters in our family. I said, 7? He said, 7. And your great-grandfather, his name was Walter Lee. And on your dad's side, I said, oh, okay. And that's your great, you know, I was learning who granddaddy was and everything else like that, you know. So the story goes that she wanted me to be just like my dad. And, you know, not exactly like Pop. I have some of his
Big shoes to fill. Big shoes to fill.
Definitely have big shoes to fill, man. I might have bigger feet than he did, literally.
True.
Lord knows I wore out quite a few of his dress shoes growing up. But definitely, you know, he, for all intents and purposes, I'm just getting to the point that I can even talk about my father.
Of course.
Because he just passed in 2021 on Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah.
That evening.
Wow.
And, you know, it's interesting that, you know, I heard his last heartbeat, you know, and to be that close to anybody, but especially your father or your mother, to be that close that you can say that, you know, that's really something.
Amazing.
And,
yeah.
You know, my dad was everything, man. I mean,
To the family, to yourself, certainly.
Yeah, man. He was my partner. That's what he used to call me every time. Hey, partner. You know, because we used to like, you know, Westerns, cowboy movies.
Okay.
So, yeah. He loved Clint Eastwood and spaghetti Westerns.
Oh, yes.
But
the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh, yeah. And we sit there for hours and watch that stuff, you know. But he and my parents exposed me to a lot of things historically. And because they were both
educators.
Educators,
correct.
Both of them educators. I mean, staunch educators. So you know, my mother's an attorney today. She's still with us. My mother's an attorney. Dad was a chemist and a biologist. He was a pre-med.
Could have gone either way there.
Could have gone either way. Then my mom made him choose either go to med school.
Well, get into that pharmacy.
Or you want to do education.
Okay.
One or two.
Okay.
One or two. And he chose education. Thank God.
Can't go wrong with that.
Thank God. I can tell you. I'll tell you that story later on. But
influence a lot more people, right?
A lot more. Dad was actually responsible for the establishment of the American-style community college system in the Republic of South Africa post-apartheid.
We're going to ring a bell on that because
You and that bell.
You like that? You like that?
Listen, he brought that bell from
I
TV
did.
on the radio.
It's coming with me. When they bury me, I'm going to have that bell on.
Ding, ding, ding. That's it, baby.
Well, that's in honor of your
Well,
father's...
he's giving angels their wings.
Their wings, right.
Thank you,
right.
Joe. Thank you. In honor of your father's achievements, which, we know the story because I know you personally, and I want you to eventually get to the Mandela story, which is incredible.
Oh, yeah.
But again, the achievement, that alone is pretty worthwhile.
Yeah. I often say, I'm also an historian. By education, I'm an engineer. I'm an epidemiologist, but I'm also an historian. My first master's degree is in Africana Studies. And, we studied extensively. I mean, geez, man. It was, we studied a lot. I mean, so, and plus we lived there in South Africa. So,
how long were you there?
I was there off and on the continent of Africa for about 10 years of my life, off and on.
Significant time.
Right.
And what years were those? In your age?
That was 84 to 94.
And how old were you in that time?
12 to 21.
Wow.
21,
Wow. Your whole adolescence.
Yeah. Impressionable, formative years.
Yeah,
man.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very tumultuous years.
Also.
You got to remember, at 12 years old in the 80s, you're still in the early 80s, and Africa is in a big uproar. Because what's happening is they're on the back end of what I call the first independence movement, right? And so they have gotten rid of and shed the overt colonial powers, right? And Zimbabwe and Zambia are still known as Northern and Southern Rhodesia at this point. And I'm in Malawi, the neighboring small country, what they call the warm heart of Africa. So I'm in Malawi. My dad was a Fulbright scholar, just left FAMU as president. Fulbright scholar. So my mother insists that we go with my dad, my brother and I. My oldest brother's in the military. My sister is in law school. And no, she's not in law school. She's in pharmacy school, but she's a girl. She's with mom and grandma, so she's okay. It's important for my mother and for my father that I go with him in order to make that transition into adolescence.
Right.
And my parents, to my parents, the concept of masculinity, who men are, it was important. And it can only be taught by a man, right?
The elder system.
That's how we grew up.
Of course.
And so we got closer. You gotta remember my brother was 20-some years old, about 21 years old. So he's a little older than I am. My brother's 20-some years old. We're close. He and I are real close. In fact, he lives here in Tampa today. He just moved here last year he moved here
After a long time away?
After a long time away.
Wow, that's great.
And he, so he was pledging at FAMU. He was online at FAMU. And my dad snatched him offline.
Oh, no.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He had a girlfriend, and he snatched him offline, and he that was it. He was in trouble anyway. He was already in trouble. But he said, no, you're going with me. Let's go, buddy. So the two of us were with my dad. My brother had an attitude. I was sad because, we're being snatched into a whole nother cultural thing.
You couldn't see the adventure in it yet.
We couldn't see it yet. But we did ultimately. Ultimately, we had a ball.
What a mind-expanding experience.
Yeah. I mean,
and ultimately something that is unique.
We were held. We were held at gunpoint. At one point, this story is interesting. We held at gunpoint on the way to Zimbabwe.
Wow.
And that's because there were what they call Zappo soldiers,
like rebels.
Yeah, they were rebels. Guy had fatigues on with an Izod shirt. I'll never forget it. He pops out of the brush with an AK-47.
Mercy.
And then somebody comes out the hills somewhere else, and I'm like, oh wow, we did. This is it. This is it.
So you had to face that right quick early in your life. I mean, that's not something that is easy to deal with.
No.
But the fact that we were Black Americans helped us tremendously. But what was even more helpful was the fact that my father was friends with Muhammad Ali.
Ah, yes.
You got to remember, it was only a decade prior. The Rumble in the Jungle.
The Rumble in the Jungle.
And everybody remembers
right.
it. That thing had such an impact.
Kinshasa, Zaire, no?
That's right. That's exactly right. And the year I was born. Mm-hmm. And so I'm saying to myself, is this guy for real? And Dad's like, yeah, I know Muhammad Ali very, very well. In fact,
and he would not approve of you killing us. That would be something.
Let's get this straight.
Yeah, that's exactly right. As a matter of fact, he was in Tallahassee before we left. Like a couple of years before we left, he came to visit. And
now you're speaking of
Muhammad Ali,
the champ.
Yeah,
okay.
Muhammad Ali. This is before his final fight because he fought last time, I think, around about 84, 85 or so.
Should never fought Larry Holmes.
Should have never done that. That was
That was his undoing.
That was bad. But we got out of it, and so we went on and we went about our business. But there was so much going on there. The news was popping. Robert Mugabe was doing this. Was making transitions into the head of government. As head of government, getting rid of British powers and the remnants of colonialism. Yeah, it was crazy. At that time, Robert Mugabe was like our hero, right? Mm-hmm. He was not what he turned into be. Ultimately, was almost despotic. But I think it was also a matter of his age, of what we were seeing as he got older, and having to deal with what was happening. Because while he ruled with an iron fist as president, but he was beloved by everybody.
Sounds a little to me like that Caribbean island that's just to the south of us, about 90 miles,
Exactly.
Because it started out that way as well there. Let me mention to everybody, if you're just joining us now, this is The Conversation with Mario Nunez and Joe King Carter. And if you'd like to get in on the conversation, we are talking this afternoon, I guess I got to say this afternoon. We're on the other side of 12 noon. We're talking this morning with Walter L. Smith II. And if you'd like to join us here, if you've got a question for Walter, if you know Walter and you just like to give him a shout out and share some love, our number here is 813-239-9663. You can always send us a text. We've got that text open and available. I'll be sure to bring that up and read that online on air as well. 813-433-0885. And you can send an email. That's to dj@wmnf.org. Walter, let me ask this because it seems like a decent segue.
Sure.
As you're talking about the African history and again, what an incredible opportunity for you to be there to witness all of that first-person eye in real time. Real time, it didn't. I'm guessing that at that time, Juneteenth, what we came to know, what we're talking about today a little bit, and what we have come to know as Juneteenth. That wasn't even in your mind then. That wasn't really a thing at that time.
No, it was not. In Tallahassee, and yes, indeed, in the state of Florida, Juneteenth was not a big thing, right?
Seemed to be more centric in Texas because kind of where it started in the Galveston region, 1865, if I'm not mistaken. And we've got some historical facts that we're going to lay on you in just a couple of minutes. But and it begs the question right off the top is what happened to Texas, man? What were they thinking? You know what I mean? Right, it's like, come on, guys.
Well, you got to remember now, slavery was the economic everything for the United States.
Cotton in particular.
Cotton was king still, and so the British support. You got to remember the British supported slavery from that standpoint because cotton was how they got their clothing.
Of course.
And so the concept that when the Civil War arose, we had a situation where you had abolitionists, but you also had those who were supporters of the concept of slavery for economic gain.
100%.
That purpose, right?
100%.
Now, slave masters knew. Remember, the majority of the black population could not read.
Intentionally?
Basically.
Right.
You know, and so understanding what was happening or knowing what was happening was keeping it from them was easy, right? Despite the fact that there was war and they knew why the war was happening, but the fact that there was an Emancipation Proclamation, what did that mean? What was that? What is that? What, explain that.
Concepts that are foreign to somebody that can't read.
And if there was talk of it, you were killed.
Mm-hmm.
If you tried to run, you were shot.
If somebody was caught teaching you how to read, that was a problem.
Yeah. Tarred and feathered. If you were white, you were tarred and feathered if you weren't hanged yourself.
These are brutal times.
They're very brutal times. But people don't people like to sweep this under the rug, right? And the history of it is something that there's always room for scholarship, the expansion of scholarship. That's
Absolutely,
why the
yes.
concept of elimination of black history, number one, is absolutely asinine. But the concept of the teaching of cultural affairs and cultural studies across the board, no matter where you're from, is important. So diasporic studies, when we call diasporic studies for Africa, for Africana studies and black studies, is so important because do you know how many dimensions of the slave trade, like levels of the slave trade, can be studied? Or it's amazing. It's amazing just the trade alone. But then when you talk about the concept of archaeology of the ships, there's a whole study behind that. Then you look at the people and how people interacted prior to, how people acted afterwards, what happens now as a result of it, who is it? Sinclair. Gosh, right now my mom having one of those brain right now.
Lewis Sinclair?
Was it?
Lewis Sinclair?
No, not Lewis Sinclair. Lewis Sinclair.
Okay.
But this gentleman wrote a book called Black Metropolis. It's a book called Black Metropolis.
Oh, okay, yes.
And so Sinclair Livingston.
There it is.
Yes.
Should I ring the bell?
There you go.
Because it came back to you. There you go. That's what that bell's for.
He wrote a book called The Black Metropolis. So Black Metropolis comes out, and it is second only to W.E.B. Du Bois' Philadelphia Negro.
Mm-hmm.
The Philadelphia Negro was the quintessential definition of true anthropological and social science, true science in that field, because before it was dominated entirely by white males who were doing what they call window observation and window experiments. They didn't go in there and learn what these people were about, what was happening. They just saw that they were living in squalid conditions or whatever it was.
Right.
Not to recognize and do the studies of talking to them, going into the home, finding out why it was happening. No, they just assumed, they just like fried chicken.
Right.
It wasn't important to him, Walt.
Right.
It wasn't. I don't think it was very important.
Let me say more so. What you're really addressing, Walter, is that all of us who are Anglos in America, all of us who are white people, I guess,
you're white?
Have been almost painful.
Translucent.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have you as white.
I'm pink, actually. So we were not so much educated as indoctrinated.
There you go.
And our indoctrination was to support the state mind, and the state mindset was, of course, dominated by patriarchy and by racism and bigotry and a whole bunch of other things. Right. And so what you're really addressing here is the fact
and colonialism, even in our country,
and colonialism. So we were not taught about the plight of indigenous peoples in America. We were not taught about the lives and plight of people who were black or brown or whatever it might be. And that's what you're really addressing is whether you you want to call it a conscious effort or not. Certainly, in many cases, it was very conscious. Oh, yeah. But there was this idea that this history is not important, and so sad that is that so much of American life is been contributed to and is a part of the lives of Black Americans.
Absolutely. When you think of the fact that from the very inception of the trade,
North Atlantic slave trade.
Let's look at it before the slave trade, right?
Right.
Before the slave trade, there was we were less than human, right? We were considered to be less than subhuman,
right?
Yet we're the breadbasket of the world, right? The Roman Empire would have died off immediately had there not been in Africa, right? The concept of the Renaissance would not have existed if there wasn't an Africa. But then once there's a trade, we now are things, right? We become things.
Things to possess, things to control.
Things to control. And it was never intended for us to be anything more than things.
Certainly not participants.
Not participants.
Yes, right.
The Constitution was not written for us. It was not intended for us. Just like nature was not intended for us. It was intended for wealthy white males to enjoy, right? And so we want to preserve it for that reason.
We've got a caller, and this is our first caller in our new show, and we'd like to honor that caller by seeing what Mike in Sarasota has to say, and I think he's got a comment he'd like to contribute to our show.
Well, thank you very much for taking my call. I'd like to offer just two comments about on what the gentleman was just saying. There are, in fact, many dimensions to the slave trade, and one of them is, and my source here is the Slave Trade by Hugh, which is written in the 90s and is a very authoritative book on the subject. The people who made the most money out of the slave trade, and I'm glad that your commentator referenced days the slave trade was happening then and on, of course, through the 1700s and 1800s. But the people who made the most money out of the slave transaction themselves were the wealthy, powerful African tribes who already had millions of slaves. They had already reduced these people to things. They already had them. And in fact, they made the biggest money out of the whole share of the transaction, including the brokers, the shippers, and the eventual sellers. So that's one thing to ponder. Also, you might know that one of the things about some of those powerful African tribes was they would capture the weaker people from the interior of Africa, and in many cases they practiced human sacrifice on a scale that would rival the Mayans. The second comment I'd like to make to the commentator on the many dimensions of slavery in America is the only country in the world that has fought a civil war to end slavery. So one of the dimensions that we have to think about when we're talking about the race issue is that America, and whether you call it white America or whatever, has made great efforts to reverse slavery and to atone for that. And I think that should be recognized.
Mike, thank you so much for your comments. We'll go ahead and take you offline now, but we're gonna address those comments. So, Walter, we've heard that the people that met the boats in the Carolinas and Charleston and so forth were black business people, free, I guess, at the time. I mean, this is not a new concept. We know that, I don't know, but they made all the millions of dollars. Maybe they brought the people to the coast. From there, they got loaded onto the ships. But listen, give us a little historical perspective.
So I disagree with the first premise of what the gentleman said.
Right, that the black impresarios.
Yeah, it's very clear. It's very, wealth. They were already wealthy, if you want to call it that. The civilizations were stymied because of the contact with Europeans, the type of contact that took place. So how are you wealthy when your civilization's been destroyed? How are you wealthy when your civilization's been looted? Even after it's been given to you, it's been looted. How are you wealthy when the resources, the people?
Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921.
We're just talking about on the continent of Africa.
Sure. But I'm saying that's a community that was also
benefited from this in some way.
Right.
The Africans, admittedly, did not benefit from this at all. and they were, they benefited from the standpoint of what was immediately given. But to say that they grew somehow extraordinarily wealthy is completely
a little bit of a stretch.
That's not. That's bullshit. I won't even say the second word.
There you go. And there you have it. No, we've learned. I mean, sometimes history can also be revisionist. We're living through that period of time right now.
Right.
You have people that say that the Holocaust didn't exist or it never happened, and all of these things that are fringy, a little fringy.
Plus, in reality, those sales of slaves on the coast of Africa could not have occurred without the Dutch and the English and the slave trade businesses, European trade slave businesses. So you can't really go and say, well, of course, somehow we're going to take some of this responsibility of the horrors of slavery and we're going to put it back on other black people. I think that obviously that system was at work, but people having slaves throughout the history of the world, whether it was Jews under Egyptians, it doesn't matter. Yeah. We've had slavery on Earth since the beginning of society.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. But this particular thing set the stage for our Wall Street.
Right.
It set the stage for our current trade system from the standpoint of things, right?
Things of value, things that have worth.
Before there was John Deere, there was the black man. You
understand what I mean? Right.
So that's what we have to remember. The other part of it is what he said about the Civil War. Sure, it was fought for the purposes of
eradicating slavery by one side, and then the other side to preserve slavery.
Right.
So push-pull.
Now, let's look at the truth of that very, very plainly, because it does speak to Juneteenth.
Good.
The reality of it is this: the reality of the Civil War is that there were people that were fighting this thing on states' rights, as they call it, right?
Correct.
Okay. What states' right was to control its economics in the South. In the North, if they could have kept slavery and continued on, they would have done it. Quote Abraham Lincoln.
From the lash to the loom.
Yeah.
Right? From the lash
bottom line
to the loom, because somebody had to send that cotton over to the textile over to Europe so that they can have their fancy T-shirts and whatnot and so forth.
Absolutely. And understand, the only reason there was not slavery in D.C., in Washington, D.C., was because the British had shown up America by abolishing slavery in the British Isles. So what are we talking about here, right? So when we fast forward to the concept of, we ought to be, this grateful, oh, thank you, Master, type of thing. I'm not, no, hell no. I don't.
Not just no.
Hell no.
So let's take this next caller. When we come back after this caller, I want to do a little bit deeper dive into Juneteenth. It's historical.
That was his implication.
It almost sounded like that a little bit.
It certainly was supporting that agenda.
Paternalistic.
Yeah.
So we've got DeAndre on the line, and he's got a comment on this topic. DeAndre, are you with us?
What's up, man?
Yeah, that was a pretty unnerving bit of commentary that took place before I went into it. But I will top it off with this. In 2019, it was revealed that those principal to the slave trade were still receiving reparations from the activity of slavery across the world over on the UK Stock Exchange. And I could say more, but I'm just going to leave it there.
No, you're right, DeAndre. That did happen.
That's a good point.
One of our most knowledgeable listeners and callers. DeAndre is always on point. Thank you, DeAndre. We appreciate your call, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is the truth. Consider that France was still getting. Haiti had no chance in hell, even past its independence, because the French were allowed to go and basically continue to keep their foot on the neck of the Haitians by taking their money, right? So, especially when Haiti is dependent upon the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and foreign, again, neocolonialism, right?
Right.
It's not necessarily imperialism, but certainly neocolonialism, and we weren't helping that situation any. We were not helping that situation.
An argument could be made that we're not helping too much today either.
No.
We're not helping too much today either. Joey, give us a little down and dirty on.
I don't really know that I have any information that Walter doesn't have. I think that
but on Juneteenth in particular.
Well,
what do we know? What do we know about who wrote into Galveston? How did that information get spread around? And why did it take so long for Texas to come around?
You seem to know more about it. Actually, Galveston, what was happening was that information was being, as Walter was pointing out, information was being suppressed.
Yes.
And it's also, there's an attempt to spread the word that this is you're actually free, my friend. And that's what's happening. So in the very early beginnings of this, some of these celebrations were, by the way, called Jubilee celebrations, in which African Americans in Texas particularly and in other places were celebrating their emancipation once they found out they actually had received it.
And it wasn't always June 19th. It morphed into this being the day. But history will tell us that different parts of the country were celebrating different days, because if your group in, say, Alabama was emancipated in August, well, then you celebrated that day in August. Or if it was in Mississippi and you were emancipated in July, it might have been different days for different groups.
Florida's date would be in May. May the 13th, if I'm not mistaken.
They settled, I think, on June 19th because Texas was one of the ones that were the most adamant about, we're going to push this celebration forward. And listen, I'm not saying that they were clandestine celebrations, but it wasn't until 21, just here 3 years ago, that the United States recognized it as a national holiday. So
it's our newest national holiday.
Good on us. Good on us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they better at this particular point, because you got to remember, it's also that same time period that the anti-lynching law was passed finally. Come on.
Right.
Yeah, you get what I'm saying?
How much time you need for that? How much time you need?
Oh, God.
Well, let me ask you a question. This is just something that popped into my silly head. So, there are a lot of people that, again, for the reasons that you cited earlier, were promoting the continuation of the slave trade because they weren't going to get out there and pick that cotton themselves. They needed the workers. They needed the workers in the field. And they knew that this was a viable way to do it and it wasn't going to cost them anything, and they were going to reap the benefits and the rewards. So that's employment. That's slave employment, if you will. That's employment, right? Free employment. So fast forward to now, these times, again, you don't want to be in the field. You don't want to be in the field. You don't want to be doing that hard work.
Right.
But the people that are coming to the south border, they're getting here just looking for, most of them are looking to get away from some pretty horrible situations in their own countries and really to save their lives, but also to look for economic opportunity. So you liked it back then, but you don't like it now? That's my question. You enjoyed the free labor back then. Well, this isn't free labor, but they're also going to be tax-paying citizens eventually, and they're going to contribute to the tax rolls.
And by the way, let me just inject very quickly.
Am I wrong?
The form, really, when you take this all the way back to the formation of the New World as early colonies in America, the entire economic engine, long before there was cotton being grown in the South, was based on, that economic engine was based entirely, almost entirely, on free labor from black slaves. And when you go back to the beginning of the original colonies and you go back to Virginia, you find these huge plantations that, and I know something about this because I've done genealogical research, and there's a gentleman in my distant past named Robert King Carter, and he owned more human beings than basically anyone in the world. And he owned massive plantations in that area in the 1600s. This is a guy who was a contemporary of Madison and Franklin and Monroe and all those guys. And his son had an enlightenment. His son freed more black people.
He probably fell in love with a black woman.
And what happened was he joined
Thomas Jefferson.
He had a religion. He joined a religion that said you can't do that, and so he just took it seriously and said, "Okay, I won't do it." And so he freed them, and this is in part why there are so many black Carters in America today, which there are a lot, like Clarence Carter. Yeah, it's very interesting because a huge number of these people took the name. But my point is that economic engine was always based on owning black people
and free labor.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at there is a there's literature that I read before that included a document that was a lease, a land lease, a mortgage, right?
Right.
On what we know today is South Carolina, right? And there were two gentlemen. First of all, whomever it was, the way I remember, it was in the 1600s. It was defaulted. It defaulted. So what they did was, they'd already been in contact with Nigeria, in the Nigeria Delta. And so what the king did was say, hey, I'm taking this back. You're in default. And
that's how this works.
Yeah, that's how this works, right? So these guys come in, they come from the States, and they, hey, we'll take that. We'll take it. Okay? Now, off the coast of Carolina is another island called Bermuda. Few people know that that's where Bermuda is, right? But Bermuda's there, and you have a bunch of white people that are staying in Bermuda, and they're staying there for a reason. The reason is because they tried to farm the land in South Carolina, and they can't. And the reason they can't is because of the sea level. They don't have the sickle cell trait. The sickle cell trait was what was protecting Africans the entire time in the Low Country from malaria. What was killing white people and keeping them from the interior in Africa. That's why they had to send Africans into the interior in order to get Africans from across.
That's fascinating.
Fascinating, yes.
That is fascinating, Walter.
Biology affecting history.
Biology affecting history, and of all things,
As it sometimes does.
right? Of all things, sickle cell, right? Now, think of this for a moment. They get here, they bring the Nigerians in because they said the petition to the king was, hey, listen, we have this thing called rice, right? And we can get this rice cultivated by
in that
the
lowland.
Nigerians in the Low Country because we've been there, we've seen how they do, and they make the stuff, they grow the stuff. He's like, really? Yeah. So they get them, they bring them over, and before you know it, South Carolina is predominantly black, right? Up until the 1700s, the late 1700s, it remained black. Even though there were slave plantations, it remained black. And ultimately what ended up happening was, and even to this day, if you go into South Carolina in the Low Country has whole counties that are predominantly black. And I know this because I worked there, right? And I watched the history, I watched all this unfold. And they started assassinating members who were members of the local government because they were black, and running them, tar and feathering them, running my town, the whole nine. And ultimately, the people from Bermuda started coming back over there and
growing rice. Unbelievable.
So that's
but
why
not so much.
That's why you
when
have
you
black
study
people in the Low Country,
of course,
doing the indigo and the rice and everything. All that stuff was done in South Carolina, in those they call them today. I have ancestors who from the Gull Islands, right there, the Gull Islands and the Geechee Islands off the coast of Georgia. Yeah.
Does Juneteenth have any significance to you in particular, Walter? Do you feel a connection with the holiday? Is it an appropriate holiday that you say, okay, this is a good thing for us to have this available to celebrate each year?
I do. I find it necessary. I find it necessary because 4th of July has, as Frederick Douglass says, has no meaning for me.
As Columbus Day has less meaning each and every year, as we find out.
You know, we were fooled into believing this thing about Christopher Columbus, right? Yet Columbus was responsible for the slave trade, the routes.
The routes, of course.
The actual routes. You know, you look at because you can't blame it on the Silk Roads, right? The Silk Road to China. You can't blame it on that. No,
right.
You blame it on the triangular trade, right? Then you look at the concept of the 4th of July, and the fact that they celebrated by selling us, by beating us, by killing us. These people celebrated doing this stuff. This documented. I'm not making it up. Walter Smith's not making it up. This actually happened. We fought in every major conflict. Yet they had the audacity to hang us in our uniforms. But yet,
pretty horrible.
But they complain when we say things like, we don't F the 4th of July. Why? Why would I want to do that? But we wanted so much to be American, to have a connection, because they stripped us from the connection that we should have had, which was to Africa.
And at every turn in history, whether it's Tuskegee and the airmen at Tuskegee, or what the contributions to the Civil War, the Buffalo Soldiers, and the contributions during World War II, the African American has always been called upon to do the dirty work.
Oh yeah, you're an American now.
And never right. When it appeases the power to be,
right.
Then it works for you. Oh, you're American, but then no, we don't want you necessarily living in our neighborhoods or necessarily coming around to see our daughters.
Right.
And that I think sadly that part of history is starting to kind of percolate towards the top again. I don't know where we're going to end up with this, but I know that we're in some troubled waters right about now.
I think that our younger generation, my son's generation, my daughter's generation, is responsible for changing that.
Leading us out of this.
Yeah, leading us into something good.
Right.
Right. Where there is a type of unity, but it has to be guided. It has to be guided, because a lot of the kids in their generation still think that they have nothing to fight for. In other words, we don't have any fight.
Yeah, what's in it for me?
Let's go ahead and just do. All we have to worry about is the zombie apocalypse.
What's in it for me? Because if it's not guided,
well,
Walter,
let me ask you, how old are your kids?
20 and 30.
20 and 30. Mm-hmm. And what is it a little more specific, that's a very positive, what you just said is a very positive thing, I think.
Yeah.
What is it you see in them that shows that they are aligning themselves with a different attitude?
Let me tell you something.
Great question, Joe.
Let me tell you something. I haven't seen so many black and white folks walking around holding hands and having babies in my life. And I'm from Tallahassee, Florida.
And, we know this for a fact. Listen to me. We know this for a fact about you, Walter, because this is part of the reason why we love you so much. You're multicultural. You're not just a black man. You're married to a Puerto Rican woman. You're raising kids that are multicultural. And you know full well, because you speak a little Spanish too, that our country, and in particular certain regions of our country, is becoming more café que leche, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
More coffee than the milk. And so as a result, that doesn't sit too well with a lot of folks. But yet they'll stand for 3 hours and cheer on the University of Alabama Roll Tide. I don't understand that.
And they'll sing our songs. They'll dance to the beat of our songs.
Eat your food.
When only 20 years ago, DJ Spaceship, 20 years ago. It wasn't 20 years ago. You couldn't even watch ESPN and hear rap music on it. 20 years something ago.
Right.
With no one in the world. It was the biggest crime on earth.
And
but now they dancing to it.
And no matter how, and we got a couple of minutes left, we're going to get this last caller. No matter how much you work that, and how much you want to make it difficult for a certain group of people to come into the light and to get their props, their love, their flowers. Yeah. You can't be cool, because you can't be cool without that. I'm just saying that's part and parcel what makes this thing such a conundrum. Because you want to be, I want to be, I don't want to. You know what I mean?
Being black is cool, baby. It's lit.
It always has been. It always has been.
It's just being black is lit. It's kind of dangerous, but it's lit.
Right. Well, I like that. Let me ring a bell on that.
Yeah,
right?
That's good.
And that's our takeaway from this week. Yeah. Hey, man, being black, it's kind of dangerous, but it's lit.
Yeah.
Let me go to the phones and see what Simon has to say in Lakeland. Simon. Are you there, Simon? You're on the air.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Just a couple of minutes left, Papa, but you're welcome. Thank you.
I'll make it as quick as I can. There's no question the importance of today, the end of slavery and atrocities and how it affected generations after generations. But there's always context within stories. Just briefly, the Jews leaving Egypt in the Exodus. Probably 90% of the people don't know that only 20% of the Hebrews and the Israelites actually left Egypt. 80% stayed. The other aspect is the Cherokee Nation, the Chief Cherokee Nation tribe. The chief had 400 African slaves. George Washington had 123. The transatlantic slave trade, only 5% of the slaves came over to America. You look at a map of Brazil in the close proximity to Africa.
Absolutely
it was Brazil. It was Brazil that did more harm to the slaves by replenishing their slave load by the proximity of Africa.
That's right.
And there's over 134 names for mulatto in Brazil. So context is important. If Africa, if the American black community was a nation at a spending power of $1.7 trillion, they would be in the G20. So we've come a long way, and it troubles me when we continue to say, we use the word institutional racism and systematic racism, and I'll leave you with this. There's a distinction between a marginalized people and an ostracized people.
Simon, you're always on point, brother. We appreciate you being there to elucidate and bring these important points to us here on The Conversation. Join us anytime, brother. Thank you so much for calling from Lakeland.
Yeah, that's the first time I can honestly say that I agreed with Simon.
Right?
I never agree with anything Simon said.
But Simon is always listening, and he's always he's present.
I like having conversation. We disagree on a lot of things. I like his presentation.
Always civil. Always civil.
Like what he presents, but I like his presentation.
Yeah. Always civil.
I can tell you this. He is right about that Brazilian thing.
Yes. I didn't mention it earlier.
84 to 85% of Brazilians are black.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's just look at the country. Look at how big the country. I mean, square miles.
But you know, my response is, and Simon, he as far as
and now our phones are ringing off the wall.
As far as I can determine, he was perfectly correct on everything he said. So kudos to you, Simon. But you know, I detected in there. I just want to make sure that this is understood.
The last bit.
As long as racism exists, you must address it. Yeah. You can't stop addressing it. So it's not something like, are you beating a dead horse? No, because what's really happening here is that this has to be, until this is more or less eradicated to any degree that racism can ever be eradicated. Right. Yeah, right. Because it's been present in every culture on earth. But the point is, we need to continue to address these issues. And these kinds of conversations are the kinds of conversations that get us there. That's it's right. The connection that we do here on The Conversation.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And, you know, to be honest with you, you and I and Walter as well, we fancy ourselves to be conversationalists. Mm-hmm. So, and that's really, there's a saying in Spanish, my grandfather always used to say it to me. It says, hablando se entiende la gente, which literally translates to talking to each other brings greater understanding. That's how we get to know each other and understand each other. So, listen, you can agree you can agree to disagree, but you got to communicate. Where it gets a little bit weird and a little bit hairy is when people shut that down or they just want to yell at you because they don't have anything to say. Like Simon was very civil in his approach and what he was offering us here. And that's what we want to have each and every week. We won't be as lucky to have Walter Smith with us the second every week.
Well, we're going to have him back. I can see that.
We will absolutely.
Because we didn't really get into the narrative as deeply as we
And
did.
I just want to say, DeAndre, we see you there. And Gary, we see you there. We're probably not going to be able to get to you. We're up against that clock, which always gets us. Let me read this one email that we did receive recently. It says, "Hey, Mario, glad to hear you and Joe back on the air. Good luck." That's from Skip. Skip was our board op on Friday mornings. And
thank you,
Skip, so much. We appreciate
Skip is a good man.
Your kind words. We got about a minute and a half. Walter, just give us your closing comments real quick. You know what time we got to be out of here.
Right. Marginalized and ostracized. More of a discussion on that. You did detect something. I detected it too. We're going to get out totally clean this, Simon. But listen, I want to thank you guys. I want to thank you guys for having me in. This is awesome. Flip it up. Sunday morning. Let's do it.
Let's do Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And hey, listen.
The forum.
As always, from my voice to the airwaves to the hearts and the minds of the people, we love you. There's not a thing you can do about it here on The Conversation.
Oh, Walter, you're our pal, baby, and we thank you so much. We appreciate you being here with us. We're going to be here each and every Wednesday. Hopefully, the shows will get better and better, and we appreciate our callers. We appreciate all our listeners, and please be sure to join us each and every week. Joe, thanks for being here.
No, thank you. It's my pleasure, and I have deep gratitude for this.
Our smooth operator Jessica handling our board today, and DJ Spaceship bringing in our calls. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye.